Welcome to the darker side of history. You smell the rot first. Damp stone and human sweat. Old, iron-sour blood caked into the floor and piss soaking the straw. You're moving through the Tower of London, but not as a visitor. You feel the narrow corridor press against your shoulders. The torchlight flickers, too dim, too fragile for the things it dares to reveal. You step over a rat's gnawed carcass and hear your own breathing more than your footsteps. She is ahead. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England. Or rather, what's left of her. She hasn't been outside in days. Maybe weeks. Her fingernails are black at the edges, chewed to the quick. Her skin, once famed for its luminous paleness, is now dull, a waxen parody of itself. And her eyes, they never stop moving. You watch her from the shadows, unseen. She speaks, but not to you. Her lips form the names of her ladies, her daughter, her god. Sometimes they tremble into laughter, high-pitched, fragile, hollow. You might flinch. That's the point. If this kind of raw historical storytelling moves you, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. No fluff, just facts and fear. Tell me where you're watching from, especially if you're alone. Now, brace yourself. Let's walk into the shadows. She was brought here on May 2nd, 1536. Hauled away from Greenwich by river barge, with soldiers on both sides. The wind was bitter that day, slapping waves against the hull as if trying to speak, trying to warn. You're on that boat now, rocking with each dip and rise of the Thames. Anne sits in the center, arms folded like a corset, spine erect with the weight of disbelief. How did it come to this? It's a question she mutters over and over. Like if she repeats it enough, someone might finally answer. But no one does. A mainstream fact. Anne Boleyn was charged with adultery, incest, and high treason. 5 men were accused of being her lovers, including her own brother, George Boleyn. All executed, no real evidence, just confessions torn out under pressure, rumors twisted into royal truth. She knows it's lies, she knows. But what shreds the soul is this. She doesn't know who decided to invent them. That's what breaks people in the tower. Not the rats, not the chains, but the not knowing. There's a story, fringe, mostly whispered. That in the week before her death, Anne believed the tower walls could whisper back. That she'd press her ear to the stones, still warm from sunlit days past, and listen. To hear answers, to hear him. Some say she clawed words into the wall, a name, a plea. The records, unclear. But under a window in the Queen's lodgings, one carving remains, AB plus he. Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII. It could be hers. It could be the guards. It could be nothing. Historians still debate whether she carved it herself, or if someone carved it for her, as a twisted memorial. You see her now, kneeling on the floor, eyes closed, lips moving. Prayer? Maybe. Or a rehearsal. She's been told she'll be executed soon. But not when, not how. Just soon. There's a sick brilliance in that. How the Tudors turned time itself into a weapon. You dangle here just like her, suspended in dread. Listen. Bell chimes. Far off. One of the many that haunt London's skyline. Anne flinches. She's been denied final comfort. Her chaplain, Matthew Parker, is not permitted to visit. She's told she'll face a French-style execution. By sword. Not axe. That's meant to be a kindness. But is it? You look into her eyes and see a woman unraveling. One who had once danced for courts in France, who once flirted with kings and matched wits with scholars. Her elegance was lethal once. Now she wears death like a veil, and the dreams. She tells the maid who sleeps on the floor beside her that she sees birds tearing at her scalp. That she sees her own mouth moving after her head is gone. that her daughter Elizabeth is calling out to her, but from behind a wall she can't breach. The maid doesn't answer. In the silence, you hear the drip of water, the rustle of straw, the clink of metal as a tray is slid beneath the door, bread gone hard and water gone stale. She barely eats, not from fear, from resolve. "I am the Queen," she whispers. "Even here, I am the Queen." You want to believe her. But when you glance at the mirror, cracked and streaked with age, all you see is a woman preparing to die in the place where so many ghosts already wait. The room grows darker. Evening seeps in like blood into cloth. The tower walls throb with old cold stories, and still, no one comes. That's the final cruelty. They don't kill her yet. They let her wake up every morning wondering if today is the day. The guards begin to place bets on it. One day, then another. She dresses in red, then white. Then she stops dressing altogether, sitting in the nightgown she wore for 3 days straight. The human body has limits, but the human mind? It breaks in spirals, and just when she can no longer bear the waiting, the silence breaks. The bolt turns. Footsteps echo. A voice speaks. "Prepare yourself, madam. Your blood goes cold." Hers doesn't even stir. She rises, like she's done this before in a dream. Maybe she has. It's May 18th, but not the end. Not yet. She's told, again, that the execution is delayed. The swordsman from Calais is late. Some say she laughs. Others say she faints. But you know what happens when someone is kept too long in the mouth of the wolf. They begin to smile, at the teeth, and Anne Boleyn smiles. You wake to screaming. It's muffled, thickened by stone and distance, but unmistakable. A name, not a word. Not Anne's. One of the men. You follow the sound. The tower is a hive of grief. Today, they're interrogating Sir Thomas Wyatt. You pass his cell, see claw marks on the door. His fingernails left those behind. Or maybe someone else's. He won't die, but he'll never be clean again. You don't stop. You keep moving toward the Queen's lodgings, because Anne's unraveling is no longer quiet. It's theatrical now. You hear her laugh, loud and sudden, slicing through the hallway like a thrown goblet. The descent didn't start here. It began with a letter. You were there in April. The court was all silk and suspicion. Henry VIII moved like thunderclouds, silent, for long stretches, then lashing out. You saw him avoid Anne's gaze at supper. Saw her place her hand on her stomach, as if to calm a storm inside her. She'd recently miscarried. A boy. A son. The son. And that had been the final fracture. Now you stand in the center of a courtroom where no one wants the truth. You watch Anne Boleyn seated before 26 peers, many of whom owe their titles to Henry. She speaks without tears, without stutter, but you see it. The twitch at her left eye, the tremor in her fingers beneath the table. She's accused of sleeping with 5 men, one of them her own brother George, another a groom of the chamber, all allegedly in the same year, sometimes the same day. You know the logistics are impossible. Historians still dispute whether the charges were simply fabricated for convenience, or deliberately structured to humiliate. Either way, they stuck. One mainstream truth. Anne was convicted on May 15, 1536, after a trial lasting just a few hours. No legal counsel, no cross-examination. A jury made of men who could only say yes. But here's what they don't always tell you. When Anne heard the sentence, death by burning or beheading at the king's discretion, she smiled. Not a joyful smile. The kind of smile you wear when you're not allowed to scream. You feel the air change. The verdict doesn't settle. It detonates. She's taken back to the tower. And that's when the rot sets in. Not in her body, but in the world around her. You see her ladies weep in secret, but when she turns to them, they smile, they help her dress, they bring her news from the outside, they speak gently of her daughter, Elizabeth, now 2 years old, now motherless in everything but name. Anne writes letters. One, to Henry, is never delivered. Scholars still argue whether it was suppressed by Thomas Cromwell or whether Anne never wrote it at all. In it, she supposedly pleads her innocence one final time, not as a queen, but as a woman who once loved him. You wonder which would be worse, writing the letter and being ignored, or never writing it and forever wondering if it could have saved you. The tower becomes a theater. Everyone plays a role. You see Cromwell rehearsing his apologies for the future. You see Jane Seymour, Henry's next queen, already preparing her smile. But Anne rehearses her death. The bizarre detail. They make her practice kneeling, so the executioner can swing cleanly. But the sword requires precision. She can't look, so she must learn how to kneel just right. Hands still, chin lifted, eyes closed, body calm. Not once, not twice, but over and over, on straw, and she does this for days, and in the meantime, outside, London gossips. Nobles wager on whether she'll go mad first. Merchants sell woodblock prints of her face. Ballads spread. Children sing of the whore queen's fall, as if it were a nursery. Rhyme, you hear one in the street. Queen Anne sits high but falls so low, off with her head and blood shall flow. You want to tear the words out of the air, but it's too late. The fall has already happened. There's another chilling footnote. A Spanish ambassador, Eustace Chapuis, long a critic of Anne, writes that the concubine weeps constantly in the tower. But others claim she remains composed, even joyful at times. So who's lying? Or is that the most terrifying truth? That Anne Boleyn could cry in the morning, laugh by noon, and pray by night, not because she was mad, but because she had no other way to live the last days of her life. One of the tower guards tells a story you'll never forget. That Anne once asked, "Will it be painful?" He didn't know how to answer, so he lied, said it would be quick, said it would be like falling asleep. You see his hands tremble as he remembers. Anne no longer eats. She prepares instead. She chooses her clothes. Not black, not red, white, a color of innocence, or surrender. You're there when she combs her own hair, pulling out knots slowly, methodically. When she binds it beneath a coif so the sword won't snag. When she cuts a cross of cloth to hold in her hands so her fingers don't tremble in the final moment. And finally, when the knock comes on May 18th and they tell her, tomorrow, you want to scream. You want to run into the room and stop it all, but you can't. You're just a shadow, just a memory, and tomorrow, that memory will wear white, kneel on cold straw, and let history bring down the blade. You hear the ship before you see it, the creak of wet ropes, the deep groan of timber shifting, the scrape of wood against stone, as the keel brushes the tower's private dock, and then, boots, 5 steps. Pause, 5 more. Measured, unhurried, precise. You stand on the quay, breath caught behind your teeth. The man stepping off the boat wears no armor, no cloak, no crest. Just dark wool and darker eyes. His hands are bare. Jean Rambeau, the sword of Calais. The one who kills with silence. You've heard the stories, how he decapitated a condemned, noble in one stroke so clean that the man's lips continued to move afterward, whispering something no one could hear. How his blades were blessed in a monastery and sharpened on whetstones soaked in wine and blood. How he once refused coin for a killing, saying, "This is not work, this is art." And now he walks through the tower gates. Not to kill a soldier, or a traitor, but a queen. Anne does not yet know he has arrived, but you do, and so do the guards. They part before him like reeds in wind. He says nothing as he's led to a chamber. He asks for no food, no drink, only a chair, a strip of leather, and his own crate. Inside the crate, you see it briefly when he lifts the lid. A sword, longer than most, slender, slightly curved, French, designed not to hack but to glide. You wonder what it's like to hold something made purely to sever the line between life and memory. Rimbaud inspects it. Not like a soldier checks a weapon, like a musician checks a violin. He wipes the blade with cloth, murmuring in Occitan, his old tongue. Not a prayer, something older, something colder. Meanwhile, Anne is praying, she's been told. You're there when the lieutenant of the tower enters her cell. He says it as gently as one can say such a thing. The executioner is arrived. Tomorrow, at dawn. She doesn't scream. She doesn't collapse. She nods. Once. And then, in a voice too steady. He is French? Yes. A breath. Thank God. It's one of history's coldest ironies, that a Queen of England would find mercy in the blade of a foreigner. A mainstream fact. Henry VIII, in what he called an act of mercy, ordered a swordsman from France rather than use the English axe. Not out of pity, out of image. The axe was clumsy, the sword elegant, and Henry needed this death to be clean. But clean doesn't mean kind. Here's the bizarre detail they often skip. Jean Rimbaud brought 2 swords, one for practice, one for the strike. He practiced in the early hours, swinging at bundles of straw and pig carcasses tied to stakes in the tower's yard. You watch him now, bare-chested, hair slicked with sweat, repeating the motion over and over. The blade sings through air, not a sound of violence, a sound of inevitability. Anne does not sleep. You sit beside her, in the corner of the room. Her ladies whisper psalms, she mouths them, then interrupts to ask, "Will he strike before I speak?" "No, my lady," she nods. "Then I shall say what must be said." You notice she holds a small ribbon, frayed at the ends. It once bound a letter. She twists it gently between her fingers. She's still rehearsing. But not her kneel this time. Her words. Historians still debate what she truly believed at the end. Did she see herself as a martyr, a sinner, a political scapegoat? Her final speech will be graceful, loyal even. But why? Some say it was courage. Others say it was calculated to protect Elizabeth's future. But here, in this silent night, she practices both truth and fiction. I die a faithful wife. No. She stops. Tries again. I submit to the judgment. No. Again. I pray God, save the king. She winces, but keeps it. You feel a sickness settle in your stomach. Not because of the death to come, but because of the control. Even now she must play her role. You step into the courtyard before dawn. The scaffold has been built not on Tower Hill where the crowds gather, but on the North Green, private, intimate, intentionally quiet. Anne's request. Or Henry's. No one knows. But here's the secret horror. She will die not in spectacle, but in stillness. The sun has not yet broken when she is led out. You walk behind her. The linen of her gown ripples in the breeze, white, unadorned, blinding against the stone. She carries no cross, only a small book of hours. Her lips move. As she walks, not in fear, in rhythm, Jean Rimbaud waits, standing to the side, sword hidden beneath straw so she cannot see it. This was his idea. To reduce fear, but Anne knows. You see it in the way her breath catches when she glances toward him. She steps up, kneels. The straw crunches. You try it. You kneel in her cell when she sleeps. You try to hold still, but your knees ache after moments. Your mind screams. Your neck the wind hushes. Silence falls like a bell. Rimbaud nods to the lieutenant. The crowd, small, select, suffocatingly close, leans in. Anne speaks. Her voice is clear, unwavering. I come here to die, according to law, and by the law I am judged to die. I pray God save the king and send him long reign. For to me he was ever a good and gentle sovereign lord. A beat. And then, she removes her coif. Her hair has been pinned up high. A bare neck, pale. Still. Rimbaud takes one step back. Then, he speaks to his assistant, not to her. Bring me the sword. Anne's eyes flick away, instinctively. She follows the sound, and in that breath, Rimbaud moves. You hear no cry, only the wind catching as the blade parts air. There is no scream, only a sound you cannot name, like silk tearing under water. Anne's body collapses forward into the straw. Blood does not spray. It seeps. A dark halo blooming around her too. Slow, too silent for the violence it hides. You are still frozen. You saw it. The exact second the blade passed through her neck. The way her hands, folded in prayer, stayed clasped as if trying to hold on to the final breath. Jean Rimbaud steps back, lowers his blade. He does not look at her. He never looks at them afterward. The assistant quickly covers the head with a cloth. No one speaks. No one claps or cheers. This is not Tower Hill. This is a killing wrapped in velvet. But the silence is more brutal than sound. The body is lifted carefully, reverently. You notice her eyes still open, locked in that final direction she turned when he called for the sword. Historians argue about it, whether it was a deception, a distraction, or mercy. Did Anne die not knowing the moment it would fall? There's a chilling detail that doesn't often appear in textbooks. The executioner whispered, "Pardon me, madam," just before the strike. Not for show, for ritual. An ancient act of courtesy from executioner to condemned. You wonder if she heard it. You follow the body, not out of duty, but instinct. The air shifts now. Cold, even in spring. They carry her through the garden gate, not toward Westminster, not toward a royal crypt, but to the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, just a few paces away. You'd expect a queen to be buried beneath marble. Instead, she's buried beneath floorboards. The mainstream fact is simple, devastating. Anne Boleyn was interred in an unmarked grave, her remains placed hastily in an old elm arrow chest. She had no coffin of state, no procession, no bell tolling. Her name. You descend into the chapel later, long after they've laid her there. The floor is slick with polish, hiding the rawness beneath. You kneel, again. And this time, the ache in your knees feels like justice, or maybe guilt. You touch the stone. There is no name carved into it, not yet, not for centuries. Some say, Elizabeth IV, her daughter, never spoke of her mother's execution again. But others claim she wore a ring with a secret portrait inside, a painting of Anne, forever young, forever accused. And here comes the fringe, the unprovable, the whispered, that her body was exhumed centuries later during chapel renovations, and that her neck bones showed signs of multiple strokes, that maybe Rimbaud missed, that maybe it wasn't as clean as legend insists, that maybe even in death, Anne was denied mercy. No official report confirms this, but those who handled the remains said the skeleton was small, slight, with a delicate jaw and an elongated neck, just like the descriptions. Was it her? Probably. But no one can say for sure. Even her final rest was uncertain. You step back into the courtyard. The scaffold is already gone. Straw swept, boards taken down, as if it never happened. The court moves swiftly. That same afternoon, Jane Seymour is sent new silks. Within a week, she's betrothed. Henry calls for music again. His appetite returns. But something in the tower lingers. You feel it. Not her ghost, not her voice, something subtler. A shift, a memory pressed into stone. You overhear a guard say he found a white ribbon tied to the bars of Anne's old cell. No one knows how it got there. No one remembers seeing her tie it. But it was knotted with care, as if to mark a passage. You find yourself wandering back to that room often. The scent of candle wax, the faint imprint of knees in the straw, the scratch marks on the table's underside. Someone's fingernails carved letters there. Truth. Just that one word. You leave it untouched. Later you hear of poets writing verses in secret, lines smuggled in letters. She loved not wisely, but too well, and paid for love with heaven or hell. Not written in Anne's time, but about her nonetheless. She becomes a myth, a lesson, a warning. Yet scholars still argue about her guilt. Did she truly flirt too freely? Did her enemies twist harmless smiles into deadly politics? Was she a reformer or a manipulator? A martyr or a menace? The truth is, none of it saved her. And this might be the cruelest twist of all. You learn that Anne Boleyn wasn't Henry's first wife to be cast aside, but she was the first to be killed. She broke the rules, refused to be silent, dared to argue, failed to give him a son. In a world where women were queens only by grace and men ruled by divine right, that was enough. Enough to condemn, enough to bury, enough to forget. But you haven't forgotten. You still smell the candle wax in her chamber. Still hear her voice, rehearsing the words. Still see the moment she turned her head, trusting, hoping, and the blur of steel in the air. You carry it with you. You always will. You are standing at the edge of the tower moat as the first light of dawn pushes through. A cold mist. The world seems quieter here, but the echoes of that day refuse to fade. You trace the path Anne took, the steps she walked toward her fate, each one heavy with the weight of a life unraveling in slow motion. The morning air is sharp, but the scent is something else. A mingling of damp earth, old stone, and faint whispers of lavender, the herb her ladies once brought to ease her nerves. You breathe it in, and suddenly you're back in that cold cell, hearing her soft prayers and whispered promises to her daughter, Elizabeth. You wonder how it must have felt to face death not with rage or despair, but with that eerie calm, that fragile grace. The crowd was small, just the men who needed to see it done, the nobles who'd profit from her fall. There was no chorus of sorrow or rage. Only the crack of the sword slicing through air and flesh, and then the silence. The mainstream fact: Anne Boleyn's execution was carried out with a sword, a rarity in England at the time, marking a grim distinction between her and other condemned criminals. Henry's choice was both a political statement and an act of grim efficiency. But the bizarre truth gnaws beneath this veneer of order. Some eyewitnesses claimed that Anne had made peace with the executioner, whispering to him moments before. She knelt, sharing a secret that would forever bind their souls. This whispered pact remains lost to history, a phantom detail wrapped in rumor and reverence. You step away from the tower walls and into the gardens where life goes on. Birds chirping, flowers blooming, children playing. The stark contrast between this gentle world and the harsh fate of Anne's last hours strikes you like a blow. Historians still debate Anne's legacy. Was she a tragic victim of ruthless politics, or a cunning player who knowingly risked everything? Did she love Henry with sincerity or ambition? Was her downfall purely the result of court intrigue, or her own missteps? The answers slip through the cracks of time, as elusive as the mist curling around your feet. You think about the layers of suffering hidden beneath the surface, how her execution was not just a physical end, but a psychological torment that began long before the sword fell. The forced rehearsals, the public shaming, the silence of her allies. And yet, in that final moment, you see Anne not as a victim, but as a woman reclaiming her story, choosing how she would speak, how she would die, how she would be remembered. You feel the cold metal of history in your hand, heavy, unforgiving, but also strangely alive. The past is not a distant place. It is a weight you carry. As you turn to leave, the shadows lengthen, and you hear a soft whisper in the wind, like a secret meant only for those who listen close enough. Remember me not for how I died, but for how I lived. The tower looms behind you, silent and eternal, a monument to power, betrayal, and the cost of being caught in the unforgiving tide of history. You walk away, but the memory follows, haunting, persistent, impossible to forget.